Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we've put together a really an extraordinary stack of sources for you, pulling from ancient spiritual texts right up to some of the latest theories in computational neuroscience.
That's right. And we're doing this because of a question from a listener, a really profound one that, it gets to the very foundation of these practices.
The question is, what is the function of sense restraint in the path to nibbana, to extinguishment? And why is it so absolutely fundamental?
It's a fantastic question. Our mission here is to take that ancient wisdom, the core teachings, and see how they correlate with what we're now learning about the brain and consciousness.
Okay, let's unpack this.
It's about revealing the deep why behind it all.
Exactly. The central idea seems to be that nibbana, that final unconditioned state of freedom, isn't just about focusing on the end goal. It's about meticulously controlling the initial input.
You're guarding the doors of perception.
Yeah, you're guarding the system from what could be a lifetime of cumulative error of bad data.
Right. It's less of a moral thing and more of a critical cognitive firewall. If the system is just constantly bombarded by inputs that trigger this predictable, self-perpetuating loop of desire,
Then nothing ever changes.
nothing changes. The whole structure of suffering just stays intact. So the path has to begin by breaking that loop at its absolute earliest point.
Okay, so if sense restraint is the solution, we have to start with the problem it's designed to solve. Where does the ancient wisdom say this loop of suffering actually begins?
It's laid out with incredible precision in a causal mechanism they call the chain of dependent origination. The texts are so specific, they show that suffering isn't arbitrary. It arises from a very specific sensory sequence.
And what are the key links in that chain that we really need to focus on here?
It all starts with the sensory links. So first you had the six sense fields. That's your eyes, your ears, nose, tongue, body, and this is crucial. The mind itself is the sixth sense field.
Okay.
The existence of those fields is an absolute requirement for the next step, which is contact.
So just the raw event of a sense faculty meeting an object, light hitting the retina, sound hitting the eardrum.
Exactly. And that contact is then a requirement for the next link, feeling, which, can be pleasant, painful, or just neutral. And this right here is the critical juncture.
Why that?
Because that feeling is the immediate requirement for the arising of craving.
It feels almost mechanical when you put it like that. It's this automatic sequence. Sense field meets an object, contact happens, a feeling arises. The real spiritual work starts right there, at that jump from feeling to craving.
Absolutely. If that feeling, especially a strong, pleasant, or painful one, if it isn't just observed and allowed to pass, it instantly conditions the mind. The mind wants more of it or wants less of it. And that subtle urge, that's craving. That establishes the momentum.
And once craving is established, that's when the whole thing escalates into, well, what feels like a life sentence, right?
It does. Craving becomes the condition for grasping the literal clinging to the experience.
Then grasping leads to continued existence, which brings about rebirth, and that just guarantees the whole package. The entire mass of suffering. Old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain.
And it all started with one unchecked feeling. It's a closed feedback loop. The texts even detail this mechanism of accumulation, warning that if you focus on the gratification you get from sensory things.
The things that are prone to being fettered. I love that phrase.
That's a great phrase. If you do that, craving doesn't just happen once. It grows. It compounds. And that's how this massive suffering originates and builds over time.
So it's not just that I saw a beautiful sight or heard a compelling piece of music. That's not the issue itself. The danger is what my mind does with that raw data. Is this where that idea of relishing comes in?
Precisely. The texts identify relishing as the real trigger. If a practitioner approves, welcomes, and keeps clinging to the little features of a sensory input. The details, exactly. Whether it's sights or smells or even just likable ideas in the mind, that gives rise to relishing. That mental savoring, that clinging to the features and details, is identified as the very origin of suffering that sense restraint is designed to stop.
That's such a key distinction. It moves the target away from the outside world and squarely onto the internal cognitive mechanism. And if you don't interrupt that process of relishing, of accumulation, the texts are pretty stark. There's that warning that you risk being overrun by the rude thoughts of the Dark One, Mara.
And that phrase really speaks to the power of unconstrained sensory input. The Dark One symbolizes all the forces of illusion, of attachment, of death. If you just let the sensory data run wild and you allow relishing to take hold, you're essentially handing the keys of your mind over to the very forces that perpetuate the cycle.
That is some serious motivation. So if the problem is letting sensory input just proliferate into this state of relishing, what does the instruction actually prescribe? I mean, what does sense restraint look like in practice beyond just, closing your eyes and plugging your ears?
It's a much more subtle and active practice than just simple avoidance. Sense restraint is defined as actively protecting the faculty of sight, the faculty of hearing, and again, critically, the faculty of mind.
Protecting it. What does that protection actually entail?
It means that when a practitioner sees a sight, they have to make a conscious choice not to get caught up in the features and details of what they're seeing.
There it is again.
They don't linger on it. They don't analyze the attractive parts or the pleasant associations. They allow the perception to register, but they deny it the fuel it needs to ignite into craving.
Not getting caught up in the features and details. That is such a stunningly precise cognitive instruction, especially for an ancient text. It sounds like you're intentionally training your mental triage system to label inputs as low priority before they can escalate.
That's an excellent way to put it, and its immediate purpose is preventative. The texts warn that if a sense faculty were left unrestrained, bad, unskillful qualities of covetousness and displeasure would become overwhelming.
So it's an ethical foundation. It stops the emotional chaos before it can even get going.
Exactly. And this is the direct intervention point in the chain we were talking about. It cuts that link between feeling and craving. If the practitioner doesn't approve or welcome or cling to those sensory inputs, relishing ceases.
And when relishing ceases, the whole chain just stops.
The whole chain stops. It prevents the generation of that forward momentum towards grasping and future existence.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Because the texts don't just promise the absence of something bad. They promise a positive, immediate outcome for this discipline.
They do.
It says that when a practitioner has this noble sense restraint, they experience an unsullied bliss inside themselves.
That's the internal validation for the practice. It's the intrinsic reward you get for disrupting that cycle of craving. And the effort to get there is immense. An adept has to learn to give up sensual, malicious, or cruel thoughts before they proliferate.
So this cognitive filter has to be running 24/7.
24/7, whether you're walking, standing, sitting, or lying down. It has to become the default mode of operation.
It sounds like the system is constantly monitoring its own state, intercepting these thoughts and desires before they can gain any real coherence. So if that's the ultimate function, how does modern science describe that exact mechanism, this input filtering?
This is where computational neuroscience offers a really fascinating parallel to the ancient wisdom. We can look at the whole process of consciousness through a framework like active inference.
Okay, wait, can you simplify that for us? What is active inference actually suggesting about how we experience reality?
In short, it suggests your brain isn't just a passive receiver of information. It's a prediction machine. It's constantly generating hypotheses or models about the world. Your conscious reality, what some researchers call the epistemic field, is what wins a competition among all these possible explanations for your sensations.
So if I hear a rustling sound in the bushes, my brain instantly starts running competing models. Is it the wind? Is it a cat? Is it a burglar? And the winner of that competition becomes what I consciously perceive.
Precisely. So how does sense restraint fit into that?
Well, sense restraint is a practice designed to manipulate the importance or the weight that we assign to certain kinds of data. In this model, that's called precision weighting. When the ancient texts talk about relishing the details, they're describing the mind's act of assigning extremely high precision weighting to fleeting, low-level sensory data.
So if I see something attractive and I start to linger on the features and details, I'm essentially sending a message to my own cognitive prediction system that says, hey, this sensory input is highly reliable and extremely important for my future behavior.
Yes, you're biasing your entire model of reality toward craving and attachment.
And by refusing to cling, by practicing restraint, you are telling the system to reduce the precision weighting on those temporary sensual inferences. This regulation has to happen at a global scale, involving what's called a hypermodel, which is the system's way of tracking how it's deploying its own resources.
That makes so much sense why the practice has to be universal. It's not about one input, it's about regulating the entire operating system. What about the actual physical structures in the brain? We always hear that deep practice, like meditation, literally changes the brain.
We see clear correlations, especially in the brain's attention networks. Long-term practice seems to strengthen the dorsal attention network.
And that one is responsible for?
That's for sustained focus, top-down attention, the kind of stability you need to maintain restraint. Think of it as your internal focus muscle getting stronger.
And what about all the stuff that's constantly trying to distract us?
That's handled by the ventral attention network. This network is all about attentional reorienting. It's that stimulus-driven capture when something sudden or new grabs your focus. If you're easily overrun by rude thoughts, your ventral attention network is likely oversensitive.
So sense restraint helps to regulate that network. It gives you more control over what actually gets to capture your attention.
It does. And beyond attention, we also see really significant changes in the brain's resting state, specifically with the default mode network.
The DMN. That's the one responsible for mind wandering, right? The internal narrative.
Exactly. It's the engine of self-referential thought, rumination, all that internal noise. And studies on long-term meditators show reduced functional connectivity in key hubs of the DMN.
So a quieter DMN is literally the neurological signature of not getting caught up in the features and details of your own internal thoughts. The brain physically stops generating as much of that unnecessary narrative about me and mine.
It's less internal noise, and that creates the mental space you need for clarity. We also can't forget the physiological side of this. Practices that support restraint, like controlled breathing, are known to enhance vagal tone.
Which is the measure of the health of the vagus nerve, governing our whole rest and digest system.
Right. And high vagal tone is strongly associated with better emotional regulation, with higher cognitive clarity, and much more efficient stress recovery. Without that physiological stability, trying to maintain the cognitive strategy of restraint against powerful desires would be nearly impossible. The body has to be a stable platform for the mind's work.
This convergence is just incredible. It brings us right back to the ultimate function of the practice, the complete cessation of suffering. Sense restraint is foundational because it creates the stability needed for the higher states of insight to arise.
It creates the mental and physical conditions required to achieve equanimity. This is that peaceful, sublime state where liking, disliking, and that tension between them, it just ceases. The texts say it happens with speed and ease as swiftly as extending your arm.
If we connect this to the bigger picture then, the final liberation is realized by becoming completely disillusioned with the 5 aggregates, right? Form, feeling, perception, choices, and consciousness.
Disillusionment is the turning point. By systematically not clinging to the features and details of sensory input, you begin to dismantle the idea that these aggregates are a stable, solid self. And that leads directly to desire fading away.
Which leads to being freed by not grasping.
And that final state, Nibbāna, is described so beautifully as the stilling of all activities, the letting go of all attachments, the ending of craving, fading away, cessation, extinguishment.
You arrive at a state where you're rid of greed, unselfish, with no need for hope, the spiritual journey completed. It's freedom from conditioned reality, and it's achieved by controlling the very conditions that generate that reality in the first place.
It is.
So what does this all mean? Sense restraint is so much more than just self-denial. It's a proactive, incredibly sophisticated cognitive strategy. It targets that conditioned feedback loop of suffering right at the point of contact and relishing.
And by refusing to cling to the features and details, you collapse that chain of craving before it can even assign high priority to temporary data. You stop the process that establishes the conditions for all future suffering.
And the whole path is really contingent on one core insight, isn't it? The knowledge that comes from this stable practice.
It is the deep realization that all form, feeling, perception, choices, and consciousness is not yours, not I am this and not myself. That deep wisdom is what ends the defilements right here in this present life.
So we've seen that the ancient path demands controlling which sensations get to enter your epistemic field of reality. If consciousness really is this global, unified model that the brain builds through competing explanations of sensations, what happens when sense restraint allows that competition to finally conclude in a state of universal, non-attached equanimity? What then does that self-referential hypermodel report when there are no more features and details to cling to and the noise of the DMN has gone quiet? That's something worth mulling over.